Thank you for joining us on this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel de Law Olawale. My guest today is my good-natured friend, Judge Stephanie Mingo. She's a judge at the Franklin County Municipal Court, the Environmental Division. We'll be talking today about the relationship of the law and the environment. Welcome to the show, Judge Mingo.
Hey, Emmanuel, thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for coming. Can you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so you said it. I am Franklin County's environmental court judge. I have been environmental court judge for the last almost 3 years now. I took the bench in January of 2019, and I currently live in New Albany with my two daughters. They have a daughter 11, another one at 7, and my husband and I we live in New Albany. And I've actually been here now, Emmanuel, for quite some time. I went to college and law school here, originally from Canton, Ohio. Um, and so I've been here for quite some time. My husband is also from this area. He's from Worthington. So we have successfully made Columbus our second home, or rather the Columbus area.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you have two daughters, 11 and 7 year old. How are you coping with them, with the pandemic, having to go to school from home and your
Yeah.
doctor?
Let me just tell you, 2020, our household was no different from yours, I'm sure. I know you have two little ones, close in age to mine. And it was a struggle, it was an adjustment. I remember when the shutdown first happened, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, the kids are going to be home for, 1 or 2 weeks, and then we'll all get back to, doing what we do. And so it was an adjustment having them home, but kids are so resilient. I mean, they handled it surely better than we did, being cooped up and sort of at home. But things have sort of gotten back to normal. They are at New Albany schools, and so they started off hybrid. And we had a couple of moments there where we had to take them out, and then they went back in. So it's been a year. We're excited to see it come to a close, but all in all, they weathered it well, and we weathered it well as well.
Wow, I
Yeah.
can only imagine. Can you tell us what inspired you to become a lawyer?
So I've told this story in the past. I was a senior in high school, Emmanuel, and there are 6 children in my family. I am number 5. There are 3 girls and 3 boys, and I am number 5. And so I was a senior in high school, and I was working on the college application process. And I remember one day I was driving home from school, and my dad had picked me up, and he said, Stephanie, it's time for you to decide what you're going to do. What are you thinking about studying, when you get to college? And I said, Dad, I'm going to be a journalist. I thought, Emmanuel, he was going to pull that car over. He made it clear to me that you have 2 choices, daughter. You can go to med school or you can go to law school, but those are your 2 choices. And I knew that chemistry and biology were quite the struggle for me in high school. So I chose law school, and that's honestly the truth. That's honestly how I ended up going to law school. My dad really did not give me a choice, and actually it did fit my interest because I had an interest in history, in English, in political science, and that sort of thing. So it wasn't a stretch for me, but I certainly needed his nudge to make the right decision. So haven't looked back. Yeah, it was a good decision.
Wow. Is your dad a Nigerian? Because Nigerian parents are the ones that make those kind of decisions for you. They're either a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, or an engineer. Anything outside of those fields,
Right.
you're not getting their approval.
You know what? It's so important for my father. My parents were always, they always impressed it upon their daughters that it's important for them that we be able to take care of ourselves. My parents did not want me to be dependent upon anyone for security. and for provision. They wanted me to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. And so it was important for them that I had a career that would sort of secure my future. And so I thank them for that. I thank them for that foresight. My siblings and I were first generation college graduates. And so it was everything to my parents that we go on to college, and not only go on to college, but then go on to grad school or law school or med school. But it was important for them that we get our education, and that certainly for their girls that we be able to stand on our own 2 feet. So I'm so grateful for that, and I am pushing my daughters in the same direction. Perhaps not law school or med school, but it's so important to me as a mother that my girls be able to stand on their own 2 feet.
Your dad and your parents did a great job. Your
Oh,
brother is also a lawyer, so yeah,
yes. Yeah. Thank you for saying
really
so. I appreciate that.
that's really
I appreciate
impressive.
it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You started your career as a child advocate in domestic and juvenile court. What was that like to be the voice of those who have no voice and those who are too young to be able to express or advocate for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, even after having taken the bench, I feel like my time as a guardian ad litem, I think that was some of the most important work that I will probably ever do. I had the opportunity, obviously, to represent children who are the most vulnerable among us. And it was at times heart wrenching, other times it was rewarding. But it was always my in my family, it was so important for us to serve our community and to give back. And I was blessed enough to grow up in I had a two-parent household. I had stability in my home, although we were poor. Make no mistake, and we had our struggles. I had a stable home, and so it was so important to me to give voice to children who um, were not fortunate enough to have that sort of stability in their lives. And so, as a guardian ad litem, you are in that child's life for a finite period of time. And so it was always my goal to sort of first and foremostly represent their best interest to the best of my ability before the court. But then also leave that child with the reflection of a positive role model. I mean, some of them, they had not met an adult in their life, and particularly for the minority children that I represented, it was so important for me to present to them a positive role model and to give them some hope that yes, you will make it out of this situation, and there is life after what you are currently going through. And so for me, it's some of the most important work that I've done. And I'm so proud of my years as a guardian ad litem.
I'm proud of you too, because there's nothing as noble as being able to advocate for the least among us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You were also an assistant prosecutor with the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office.
Yeah.
What kind of cases did you handle?
I was a assistant prosecutor here in Franklin County, and initially I thought that I was being hired as sort of a contract attorney in the civil division. And to my amazement, I went to the interview for the position, and then former prosecutor Ron O'Brien sort of informed me that there was an opening in the tax division, and he thought I would be a good addition to that division. And so I thought to myself, I have no idea what goes on in the tax division, but sure, I'll plug in and work as hard as I can. But it turned out, as I learned on that very first day, that the tax division or the tax unit in the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office, it was actually the division responsible for representing the Franklin County Treasurer before the Environmental Division. So the treasurer has an interest in almost all of the cases, most of the cases, I would say, most of the civil cases here in the Environmental Division. most of the properties that are brought before the environmental court, there are typically back taxes that are owed on those properties. And so, in that respect, the Franklin County Treasurer has an interest in those back taxes and seeing those paid. And so, as the Franklin County prosecutor, the treasurer is the county prosecutor's client. And so, it was my responsibility to represent the treasurer before the environmental division. So, that is what I did on behalf
Wow.
of the county prosecutor. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was it like to work in that office?
You know, I I would say this, and I would challenge anyone to say, you know, as a county prosecutor, you learned so many facets of the shop. So I had been an attorney for a number of years. I had worked initially in private practice. I'd worked for um, a health care company. I'd worked for the state as an assistant attorney, but as a county prosecutor, I think you learned some things that you probably would not pick up elsewhere. It's just that that courtroom experience and that sort of I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it, but it's sort of like I don't know. It's a good. I guess I call it a shop. It's a good shop to work in because you get the opportunity to wear different hats. Every case is different, and then certainly there's no substitute for that courtroom experience and that courtroom exposure that you get on the prosecutor side of the table. So it was a good experience for me. Obviously, my previous experiences with the Ohio Auditor of State as a compliance attorney. That also really impacted me as I worked in the environmental division. Obviously, compliance with the housing and building and zoning codes are important here in environmental court. And so, certainly, my experience as a compliance attorney really impacted my work here in the division.
I can only imagine your job at the prosecutor's office. It's like a training ground for gladiator litigators with that courtroom experience. And
It is, but I think it's so important, and I'm so thankful that um, I spent some time outside of the prosecutor shop. So initially, when I was in law school, I thought, yes, I want to be a prosecutor. And that sort of evolved over the years. And I ended up stepping out and hanging my own shingle when I initially started practicing. And so I did not return to a prosecutor's office for some time, but I am thankful for the experience that I had in working for the state. I mean, I think it's so important, especially before you take a seat on the bench, that you just sort of have a little bit of a well-rounded experience. I think as an attorney, it's great to have that experience at the prosecutor's table, but I value the time that I spent in working for the state as well as or in private practice.
yeah, yeah, apart from serving the county, you also serve the state, working with the Ohio Auditor's Office.
Yeah.
What was it like to serve the state as such, in such a capacity,
Yeah,
including counsel?
so I worked under then Auditor of State Dave Yost, and as I said, I was an assistant legal counsel in his shop. And I would have to say, of all of my legal experience, I feel as though that experience is probably what sort of rounded me out the most. So in that office, I was responsible for representing auditors who worked throughout the state of Ohio, performing compliance audits for public entities. And I say that I think it rounded me out the most because I'll give you an example. So the auditor of state, as I said, it's responsible for auditing all public entities, from libraries to community schools to county governments, any public entity that you can think of would undergo an audit by the Ohio State Auditor. And so, having never worked for a library or a public school or a public hospital, coming into that shop and then having to learn about the codes and about the regulations that govern those entities, I had to quickly get up to speed on what would qualify those entities as being in compliance under a financial as well as a performance audit. So I would say for me, that really gave me, I guess, such a well-rounded experience as an attorney, just having to pick up right there on the fly what those code sections would require of that particular entity, and then making a determination as to whether or not those entities are in fact in compliance. So for me, that having that experience, it was so vital and so important for me as an attorney.
Oh, awesome. And you became an environmental judge in 2019.
That's
uh,
right.
By
That's right.
appointment. You were appointed by the governor.
Yes.
And soon after that, you had to run a campaign to retain your seat.
Yes.
What was it like to have to do that within a short period of time?
It was like no other. It was like no other experience. I mean, so I've told this story in the past, but I received the news that I was appointed as the environmental court judge. I received it on Christmas Eve of 2018, and I actually received the phone call from the governor's office, and someone said, "Good morning, Judge. When do you want to start?" And I think I needed a minute. I always say I feel like I may have passed out because it I feel like I went to bed a prosecutor, and then the next morning I woke up a judge, and it was an experience that I will never forget, a moment that I will never forget. But then reality quickly sets in, and yes, just as I'm taking the bench, I'm also getting off the ground a campaign. As I said, I'm a mother of two little girls who demand much of my time. I'm a wife, and so that was a challenge. But I am a firm believer that the Lord would never give me more than what I could handle. And I felt that all of my experiences, my previous experiences, really led me to that moment. And I certainly sort of relish the opportunity to rise to the challenge and meet it and run a powerful campaign while mastering my courtroom and being a good mom to those girls. So it was a challenge. I will not deny that, but I'm so thankful that I've had the opportunity to serve in this capacity, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, it was your Christmas gift for 2018, and you
Yeah.
ran with it, using it to serve the community. Thank you
Yes.
for that.
Thank you.
Yes. And prior to you being appointed to the bench, you in your private practice, you didn't practice environmental law or anything like that. Most of your other jobs before then did not focus solely on environmental law. How did you get yourself up to speed when you got appointed to the bench?
Yeah. Well, as I said, when I worked as a prosecutor, my responsibility was to cover the docket in environmental court. And so, um, to my surprise and to my delight, I found as a prosecutor working in environmental court that this courtroom was like no other. The cases were very different. The defendants were very different. The staff was different. The judge was different. There was a different vibe in environmental court, and I think that's because of the nature of the work that we do here. Emmanuel, it's truly a community court, and when I say that, I mean that I can think of no other courtroom in Franklin County more connected to the community than environmental court. So it was an easy fit for me. It was easy for me to be eager to get myself up to speed because I was in an environment that was so closely knitted to the community, and the work that was done here was so important and so vital to Franklin County. It was easy for me to immerse myself in environmental law and get myself up to speed and exactly what this division did and exactly what the expectation was here. So, an easy fit, an easy fit.
And what kind of cases do you handle as the environmental judge?
Yes, thank you for asking me that. That's um, So let me just tell you about the division here. You can think of environmental court really as Franklin County's um, public nuisance, or rather public nuisance property court. I think that's probably the best way to think of the court. A lot of folks refer to the environmental division as Franklin County's housing court. I think it's a bit misleading because it leaves you with the impression that the court hears eviction cases and landlord tenant disputes, when in actuality, the court does not have jurisdiction to hear those types of cases. An environmental court, when a prosecutor, whether it's typically it's a municipality, most of our cases come from the city of Columbus, but when the prosecutor files a complaint with regard to a property that is not in compliance with housing, building, zoning, or safety or health codes, that case is filed right here in environmental court. We have exclusive jurisdiction over those types of cases. It is a unique court. We are the only environmental division within the state of Ohio, and I don't believe there's another state or another court quite like it in the United States. It's very unique in terms of the scope of the jurisdiction. But so most of the cases that I hear are dealing with properties that are a nuisance for the community. So, for instance, if a home, let's say a home is it's falling apart, it needs a new roof, the shingles are coming off, the cement steps are crumbling, the grass is overgrown, there are weeds, the chimney is crumbling. Those sort of issues would be ripe for this court to deem that property to be a public nuisance and to order an injunction in the case, forbidding that property owner to continue to maintain that property in that type of condition. I also hear cases where the property is being used for illegal activity. So let's say you have perhaps it's a club or it's a business, maybe it's a spa that is being used for human trafficking or prostitution. Maybe it's a drug house in a neighborhood. Those are all good reasons for the court to deem that property to be a public nuisance and to order specific orders with regard to how that property should be dealt with. And then finally, by agreement of the municipal court judges here in Franklin County, as the environmental court judge, I handle all of Franklin County's animal abuse and neglect cases. I also handle all the dog bite cases. So a lot of people refer to the environmental court as the animal court for Franklin County, and I'll take that. I'll take that.
Okay, yeah, you mentioned handling cases of properties that are falling apart.
Yes.
Some will say that if a property that is falling apart is a result of either poverty or the owner, losing their fortune.
Yeah.
So, do you take that into consideration before making an injunction? And what kind of injunction do you put in place? Do they have
Yeah.
to vacate the property, or do they have to give it to the state or the municipality?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Those are good questions. So, in essence, yes, absolutely. There are reasons why individual property owners find themselves in environmental court. And it is so important for me to get to the heart of what drives these cases into environmental court. It is, as you say, more often than not, it is because a property owner has perhaps lost a job. Maybe they are underemployed. Perhaps they are suffering from either physical or mental illness. There are reasons that are, there are reasons in life why someone may experience a financial misfortune that would then cause their property to fall out of compliance. And so, yes, as the environmental court judge, I am sensitive to those reasons. And I spend a good deal of my time, Emmanuel, really just trying to educate the public about environmental court. It is always my goal to secure as many resources as possible for the defendants that enter into environmental court. Let me back up a little bit. Before the case even hits my bench, the case is set for a status conference so that defendants can sit down with the magistrate here in environmental court. And the magistrate, on my behalf, will pull from that defendant, what is it that brought you to environmental court? What is it that caused this prosecutor to file the complaint against you and your property? And a lot of times, obviously, we find it's just a lack of resources. And then at that point, we really do all that we can to link those individuals with the resources that are available here in Franklin County. COVID has done us no favors. Resources. We were certainly short on resources prior to COVID, and even now, even more so. So it's difficult, but anytime that we can identify a resource for a defendant to take advantage of, a defendant in need, we'll do all that we can to link that individual. We actually have folks within the courtroom that can link those individuals with applications to complete in order to see if they qualify for resources that might assist them with bringing their property into compliance. Um, if we are unsuccessful in linking those individuals to resources, obviously the court has to balance the need of the public to have properties in compliance. We know that properties that are not in compliance, oftentimes it breeds crime, it breeds violence. And so as the environmental court judge, it's always my job to sort of balance that, really the need to protect the community from the consequences of properties that fall out of compliance, and sort of balance that with the needs of the defendants and the reasons why those defendants end up in environmental court. So it's always a balance. It's always a balance, and I think compassion and really understanding the struggles of the defendants that come through environmental court, and that's why I say it's a different courtroom. You will find that most defendants who come here, they want their property to be in compliance. They don't want to be a derelict property owner. They want to have their property be in compliance. It's just a matter really of resources in most cases.
Thank you. And in situations such as the one we're talking about, are they sometimes given the opportunity to remedy the non-compliance?
Oh, absolutely. So you asked the question with regard to what type of injunction. So once the case hits my bench and I have an injunction hearing, I will hear evidence from code enforcement that is typically testimony as to the status of the property and what the current violations are on the property. Obviously, the defendants certainly have a right to attend and certainly have a right to defend themselves against the allegations with regard to their property. If I do find that the property is a public nuisance, I will then order an injunction, and it's a permanent injunction in most cases, which is really forbidding them from maintaining the property in that sort of condition. At that point in time, based upon the facts, every case is different, but depending on the facts of the case, I will then set a compliance timeline. So if I know that an individual is working toward bringing that property into compliance, I will set a timeline that is reasonable for them to bring that property into compliance. I will also give the city authority. If the property is not brought into compliance, I always have the option of giving the city authority to go onto the property then and abate whatever nuisance is still there. That is usually the cost of that abatement is usually done at the defendant's expense. But we certainly want to be sensitive to defendants who are working toward compliance and just simply don't have the resources. But again, it's that balance, because if I have a property where maybe this individual has 100 cats, and you're dealing with cat feces, dog feces, and it's just a mess, and there's a smell, and it's going throughout the neighborhood, then certainly that compliance timeline will be a little tighter, and I'll have to make sure that for the good of the community, that I have a shorter timeline for that individual to bring that property into compliance. But it's really a balancing act. They do have the opportunity to bring the property into compliance. If they do not, then certainly the prosecutor does have the option of asking the court to set the case then for a contempt hearing. And once we reach that phase, the property owner is really looking at daily fines for each day that the property remains in non-compliance.
Thank you. For the average person watching this or listening to the podcast, we keep hearing the word prosecutor allegation, and prosecutors are often associated with crime and incarceration.
Yeah.
Do you incarcerate violators, in your court?
Yes, thank you for asking. So, as you said, I am in municipal court, and for those listening, and here in municipal court, for the most part, we hear misdemeanor cases, and certainly in environmental court. Most of my caseload, it's a civil docket, meaning the excuse me, the prosecutor is looking for a civil remedy. They are looking for the court to order an individual to bring that property into compliance. And if not, they more than likely are not looking for the court to jail that individual, but rather the court to assess fines. So for those listening, most of what I do here in environmental court does not involve the punishment of a jail sentence. Most of my docket is civil. There are times when the city prosecutor opts to prosecute a case not as civil, but rather as criminal. So in other words, there are times when a property falls out of compliance, and the city prosecutor, based upon whatever analysis he does, he decides to bring the case to environmental court as a criminal case. And in those situations, it's typically a first-degree misdemeanor housing code violation, punishable by a maximum of 180 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. Typically in those cases, Emmanuel, the prosecutor is not looking for this court to sentence the individual to jail, but to simply assess a fine and order that individual to get that property into compliance. So it is very infrequent for housing code violations that I would sentence an individual to jail. There are times where we do have slumlords who, have a history. We call them our frequent flyers, where they have a history with environmental court, a history of allowing their properties to fall out of compliance and allowing Franklin County residents to live in squalor. And in those situations, the city prosecutor has asked this court to consider jail time for those slumlords. Those cases are far and few in between. But in those situations, I certainly would consider jail time as an option in those cases.
Thank you. Talking about slumlords, someone who has been found in contempt or violating the codes, who has tenants, are those tenants eligible to withhold rent because of those violations, or they still have to continue making their payment to the slumlord?
Yeah, so the tolling of their rent, or rather, I would guess for those watching, it's sort of them withholding their rent until the violations are remedied. That would not be done through this court. We have had defendants working through, let's say, eviction court, where they are holding their rent in escrow because of a situation there. And oftentimes it spills over to environmental court because there are building and housing code violations associated with the property. So in short, the escrow portion would not go through environmental court, but we have had tenants who are withholding their rent, until the violations are remedied. That is not ordered by this court, but we do have situations where landlords are here in environmental court and their tenants are holding their rent in escrow.
Thank you. And apart from the prosecutors bringing cases to your court, who else can file actions? Can the private citizen file an action in environmental court?
Yes. So the technical answer, Emmanuel, is yes. The code does allow for a private individual. They have to it's very technical, and they would have to pay a bond amount in order to bring the case to environmental court. I don't believe in the history of environmental court an action, a civil action, has been brought by a private individual. I don't believe, at least since I've been on the bench here, it's happened. I would imagine if it has, it's probably been perhaps once or twice. It's uh, without fail a city prosecutor of a municipality that would bring that type of action. But certainly, I always tell individuals that if you are aware of a property that is a public nuisance, or you believe it is a public nuisance within your neighborhood or your community, it is an eyesore. Maybe it's a what you believe to be a drug house. It's so very important that you reach out to code enforcement. If you live in the city of Columbus, it's important that you reach out to 311. And then finally, if you always certainly have the option of reaching out to your city prosecutor if there is a particular property that you are concerned about. The environmental division also has what we call two environmental specialists. Their primary responsibility is to ensure that the orders that I am issuing from the bench are being carried out. And so I like to let folks know that if there are properties that you are concerned about, you always have the option of reaching out to the environmental specialist and reporting those addresses so that they can be reported to the proper authorities, and an investigation can begin.
Thank you. Can you explain to us what illegal dumping means?
Yeah. So for those watching, it's really when you think about illegal dumping, you think about what you see. Let's say in an alley, someone has left a couch. Maybe they've left a refrigerator. Maybe they've left construction debris. That is what we would consider here in environmental court to be illegal dumping. And Emmanuel, it's probably the number one complaint that I hear as I go throughout Franklin County, speaking with community groups and neighborhood associations. Illegal dumping, unfortunately, is a huge problem for Franklin County, and most often on our west side, which would be our hilltop, and then certainly. I know that the Linden area sees that quite a bit. It really is the most frequent complaint. It is a problem, and typically the city prosecutor will bring that to environmental court. It's typically charged as a misdemeanor three. One of the things that I've tried to do with illegal dumping is really ensure that my sentencing in those cases is consistent. I want to make sure that folks who commit that type of crime understand that if you offend on our communities, I will require you to give back to the community. So, typically in those cases, in addition to a hefty fine, those individuals I require to complete hours of community service through the court's community cleanup crew program. I feel that if you offend on the community, you should have to give back to the community. And what better way for an illegal dumper to give back than to have to go back right back to those streets and clean them up? So it is an issue, it is a problem, and it's certainly something that this court takes seriously.
Yeah, for those found violating the law of illegal dumping and whom you have, sentenced to pay some fines,
Yeah.
in the event they can pay those fines, what are the consequences?
Yeah, so it really drives at what is preventing that individual from paying those fines. I really want to know, what the issue is. Is it employment? Is it that you're struggling financially? Have you had some sort of physical setback that has not allowed you to pay the fines that I've ordered you to pay? And in those situations, Emmanuel, I'm always happy to consider other ways for those individuals to compensate and to give back to the community. As I said, if an individual has illegally dumped, it's so important for me that they give back to the community that they offended on. So if they can't pay the fine, I always have the option of increasing the community service hours that they perform as a way of them giving back. So certainly sensitive to folks who fall on hard times and want to certainly follow the court's orders. If they are unable to, there are other ways that they can give back, and they may do so through our community cleanup program.
Thank you. And what is littering in the legal context?
Yeah, so believe it or not, here's an interesting fact. Littering is really it's what the folks watching your podcast would think. It's throwing something, trash, debris, anything on the ground. Believe it or not, Emmanuel, you can be charged with littering by throwing a cigarette butt out of your car window. That happens frequently when folks get pulled over and perhaps they're smoking in the car. They flick that cigarette butt right out the window, and that officer then uh, always has the option of charging that individual with littering. So it really is disposing of anything in a manner that you should not. If it doesn't go into a trash can or a proper waste receptacle, then it could be considered littering, and you can be charged with it and end up here in environmental court. So it is important. Do not litter, otherwise you could be charged. And typically it's a minor misdemeanor. And But why bring yourself to environmental court when you can just simply throw the item out? Just don't do it. Don't do it. Let's keep our streets safe and clean, and don't litter.
Do no litter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What if what if you throw water out of a moving car? Would that be considered littering?
I have to say, that's a really good question. I don't know that an individual would be charged by pouring water out of a car. Everyone's probably done that. I've had cases where someone has poured the water out and then thrown the water bottle out. And in that situation, the complaint will usually reflect that the individual then threw the water bottle out of the car window. So I'm going to say chances are if you pour water out, it would not be charged as littering. But keep that water bottle in your car until you get to a trash can.
Let me give you another scenario. What
Sure.
if someone is sick or maybe they are overly drunk, inebriated, and they threw up on the street? Will that be
Yeah.
considered littering
Nah,
or illegal dumping?
that's a good question. Oh, Lord. Gross, yes. Legal dumping or littering, probably not.
Hmm.
Probably not, Emmanuel. I think not. I think not. And that's a good question. But no. And it's funny because you will see some of that information in a complaint. But usually, if they're inebriated or drunk and they're throwing up in the park or on the street, eventually something's going to fall out. A cigarette pack, they're going to drop something that's probably going to get them charged with littering on top of a whole host of other things, perhaps that could result. So, those facts do come into environmental court occasionally, but it's usually some other item that then gets dropped on the ground and results in a charge.
So don't
Yeah.
drink and drive. Don't drink and dump.
Very good.
Okay. So what are considered solid wastes?
Yeah. So when we say solid waste here in environmental court, we typically when code enforcement testifies that solid waste is on a property, it really can be anything. It could be, maybe someone was working on their wood fence and they've left the wood from the old fence in the yard. Maybe someone has crates or old totes that are just sort of strewn about the backyard. That can be considered solid waste. So it's really, I guess, for those watching the podcast, I would really think of it as really any sort of bulk item that is left or improperly stored on the outside of a home. So whether it's a bag, maybe there are tires, anything that you would, I guess, sort of think as of substance or bulk, it would probably result in code enforcement's testimony that there is solid waste on the exterior of the property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, how can private citizens report violators and violations?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So, as I said, if you live in the Columbus area, you can always call the 311 line and report violators. You can also reach out to the Environmental Division directly and ask to speak with the environmental specialist and report the address through that avenue. You can also certainly reach out to the city prosecutor. The city of Columbus is divided into zones, what we call zones, and a zone attorney for each zone is assigned here in the city of Columbus. So you can always report what zone it is and make your complaint that way. I have had individuals reach out even to the Franklin County engineer for those folks who perhaps may live in a township and they're just not sure which municipality or which prosecutor office to reach out to. You can contact the Franklin County engineer to figure out who you should report the issue to. And finally, certainly, you can reach out directly to code enforcement to make a complaint with regard to a property. The environmental court's website, we also have a form that you can complete and fill out with regard to any property that you believe to be a nuisance within your community. So there are a number of avenues for folks to reach out and report a property. And I always encourage folks to do so without people being vigilant, without residents being vigilant for their communities and for the safety and cleanliness of their community. Most of these cases would not make it into environmental court. So I encourage folks to be vigilant. And certainly if you see something, report it.
Thank you. It takes a
Yes,
village to keep the community safe.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And
It's my
how,
honor.
yes, thank you. How does your work impact the community?
Yeah,
Because
I
people just see you as a judge who makes decisions as to violators and violations. So some may not know what the impact is. I would like you to educate them.
yeah. So as I said, there is something so very special about the environmental division. I do believe that this court is the most community oriented courtroom in Franklin County and perhaps the state of Ohio. We really consider our neighborhoods, our neighborhood association, our neighborhood leaders, um, our area commissions to be partners in safer, cleaner communities. And so I have always felt it to be my responsibility as the environmental court judge, one, for neighborhoods and communities to know that the court exists. I know frequently when I first took the bench, many folks said they didn't know and Franklin County had an environmental division. And so um, I spend as much time as I possibly can getting out and sort of educating folks about the work of the court and why it is so important for us to maintain clean communities as we see the rise in violence in Franklin County and certainly within the city of Columbus. It's more important now than ever for our neighborhoods and our communities to understand that properties that are out of compliance, that become a public nuisance, those properties breed crime. And so now more than ever, it's important for the court to really continue to strengthen the partnerships that we have with neighborhood associations, civic associations, area commissions, to ensure that they know that we're partners in keeping our communities safe and clean. So I think certainly I want individuals to know that the court is interested in educating and being a partner in safe, clean communities. And then also, Emmanuel, I think it's important, just as a Franklin County judge, for the community to know uh, who I am. I think it's important for them to know who their elected officials are. I just wanted to mention very briefly this year, I started an initiative with another judge here in municipal court called Beyond the Bench. And really, the purpose of Beyond the Bench is going active listening, right? Active listening. So for judges, there are so many constraints in terms of what we're able to discuss and what we're able to talk about and what we are able to publicly give opinions on. But I saw a gap and a need for, I guess, the role of judges in the community to really just actively engage and participate by actively listening. And so for me as a judge, it's important that the community know that I am there. I am there to listen. I am there to not only listen to hear, but really listen to understand what it is that is impacting them most in their daily lives, and not only in their community, but in their families. It's important to me that judges, and I will speak for myself, certainly it's important for me to be an informed judge. And I don't know how you do that without being an active listener and actively engaged in community. So it's important for me to just be there, not necessarily to be there to hold the microphone and to sort of always be the keynote speaker, but to be there to just engage and to listen and to take in what it is the community would want their judges to know.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephanie, for opening the doors to listen to the public and the community.
Absolutely.
So that way
Absolutely.
we can better serve them.
Yeah, it's my
And
honor.
you're a Christian
Yes.
and a spiritual person known for gentleness, humility, and honesty. How has your personal life experiences informed your decisions as a judge?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that, and thank you for the kind words, Emmanuel. I think with anyone and anything that you do, you don't leave your beliefs behind. Certainly, as a believer, as a Christian, it what I believe and what I base my life upon. Um, it's followed me in every endeavor, and it's certainly no different on the bench. Certainly, each and every day that I take that bench, one of the things that I'm reminded of through my beliefs is really grace and compassion. It's when I think about putting that robe on and you sit on the bench and you have the authority to make decisions that impact the lives of individuals in a very real and meaningful way. It's important for me to take the time to see that individual, certainly as a human, to see that individual for all of the hurts and all of the misfortunes that perhaps brought that person in front of me. And it's always important for me to take that bench and to see that individual decide that case with grace, humility, and compassion. Those are all things that my beliefs have instilled in me. And certainly when I sit on the bench, I don't leave those values behind. Emmanuel, I hope I endeavor to bring those values with me each and every day that I'm on the bench. And I hope that when folks walk into my courtroom, for whatever reason that's brought them there, I hope that they can sense that this is a courtroom of it is a courtroom that demands compliance and order, but it isn't also a courtroom of grace and compassion, and certainly a courtroom of humility.
Thank you. Grace, humility, and compassion. Hmm.
Absolutely.
Triumvirate. You are running for re-election again this year,
I
shortly after
am.
you won re-election last year or so.
Yeah.
What is that like? And
Yeah.
what do you want people to remember you by when they go to the polls in November?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking. Um, Emmanuel, I hope that they will really judge me on my work. Um, judge me on the work that I've done for Franklin County. I had the occasion to sit on a panel not too long ago, and the focus of the panel was really the consequences of mass incarceration and what that means for individuals who are then being reintroduced into the community. And um, and sitting on that panel, one of the things that we talked about, and one of the things that I said was that, in the time that I've been on the bench, I have learned not to clutch the robe too tightly. And what I mean by that is I will give this race all that I have. I desire to continue to serve in Franklin County as the environmental court judge. But my beliefs teach me to hold everything loosely. I believe that this is where I am meant to be at this hour. Um, but these positions in this seat, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the voters. And so I am always careful that every day that I wear that robe, that I remember that voters will decide whether or not I should continue to wear that robe. I certainly hope that they do in November, and I will work as hard as I can to ensure that be the outcome. But most importantly for me is really the service. Whether I'm on the bench another 4 months or another 15 years, what's important to me, what's foremost important to me is the service to Franklin County, and to really do all that I can to give back to my community. So I wear the robe, I wear it proudly, it is my absolute honor, but I hold it loosely. I hold it loosely because if I think as an elected official, anytime you become too focused on winning that next election, you miss out on the beauty of service. And for me, that's always the priority. That's always, and that's the best part of it, right? It's the service. It's being able to give back to your community. I don't know what the outcome will be in November. I certainly pray that I will return and continue to be Franklin County's environmental court judge. But I have to be here. I have to be present, and I have to serve in the here and now. And so that's what I intend to do.
Thank you. And for those of you watching, if you want to know more about Judge Stephanie Mingo, go to mingoforjudge.com. This is a judge who has been on the bench since 2019. Our judicial philosophy is all about grace, compassion, humility, actively listening to the community, and serving the community. Thank you, Judge, for coming onto Legal Angle. It's been an honor interviewing you.
Emmanuel, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And for those of you watching, thank you for joining us. Until next time, stay safe.